Wano is by far the longest arc in all of One Piece, stretching 149 chapters and being in serialization for over 4 years. One of the main reasons for the arc being this long lies with one character. While this character is not the only reason for Wano being so long, it is arguable that they brought nothing of value to the story. The character in question is Yamato, the son of Kaido. Introduced to the story in Wano Act 3, Yamato has so far made zero contribution to the story of One Piece. This was already somewhat foreshadowed by the complete lack of setup for the character. Yamato was first brought up by Kaido in chapter 977, and revealed only 6 chapters later in the very same volume. After this, Yamato's lack of relevance is frequently brought up by none of the characters knowing who she is, what she wants, or even what's her name, including Yamato herself. This of course is a joke. This video is actually about Kurosumi Orochi, the Shogun of Wano. Orochi is the overall secondary villain of the Wano arc after Kaido. Despite this lofty title, he is also arguably a completely pointless character. This video is going to break down how nothing Orochi ever did benefited the story and why he should have never been written in the first place. The main point of this argument is that virtually all of Orochi's role in the story could have been fulfilled by Kaido alone. Kaido could have simply been the Shogun of Wano and the sole main antagonist of the arc. This would have not only tightened the Wano storyline but given Kaido even further gravitas as the arc's main villain. To begin with, Orochi being the Shogun of Wano is a fairly meaningless part of the plot. As the de facto ruler of the country, the entire arc already revolves around Kaido. Almost all of the events that led to the Wano arc and the reason why all the characters came there is because of Kaido, not Orochi. The Straw Hats and the Heart Pirates came to the island because they wanted to help Momonosuke and because they'd already picked a fight with Kaido by destroying the Smile Trade and by defeating Doflamingo. The Kid Pirates and Hawkins came to Wano because Kaido tried to recruit them to his crew. In addition, Apu was already working with Kaido even before this point. Then we have Drake, who also came to Wano to spy on Kaido for the Navy. Because of the actions of these first-generation pirates, others like the Big Mom Pirates, Karibo and Jinbei ended up coming to Wano as well. Then there are also others like the CP0 agents who came to Wano because of the Beast Pirates' weapons. It is also doubtful the samurai would have had to ask Marco for help just to deal with Orochi. Kaido's influence also extends to Flashback, where Ace also came to Onigashima and met Yamato because he wanted to beat Kaido. Even when looking at most of the Wano-centric characters, it is clear Kaido is by far a far more important figure in their lives than Orochi. While Orochi and the Kurosumi began the events that led to the Kozuki being overthrown, it is frequently brought up that the only reason why they were able to do any of this was because of Kaido's might. As the person who actually killed Oden, most of the samurai have far more of a vendetta with Kaido than with Orochi. The vast majority of the characters who played a role in the Wano arc are in fact very indifferent to Orochi. All the pirate characters have only a couple interactions with him, while to the samurai, Orochi is an afterthought next to Kaido. Even when Kinemon and the Scabbards finally came face to face with Orochi at Onigashima, they simply got through him, saying that they had more important things to do. Of the dozens of characters that played a role in the Wano arc, only a few like Hiyori, Denjiro, Toko and Fukurokucho have more of a connection to Orochi than to Kaido. In the grand scheme of things, these were also very minor characters in the arc, and the story did not exactly thrive on their relationship with Orochi. Beyond having very little connection to the rest of the One Piece cast, the impact Orochi's actions had on the plot is also surprisingly minuscule. This video will next go through all of Orochi's plot-relevant actions and see why they could have been done by just Kaido or another pre-existing character. Orochi's first real mark on the story is in starting the conspiracy to overthrow Kozuki Sukiyaki and having the Kurosumi take over Wano. Even back at this point, however, Orochi is just a figurehead. The plot is actually the creation of Kurosumi Higurashi, and the only reason why she even involves Orochi is because he is the heir of the Kurosumi daimyos. After Kaido occupies Wano and Orochi becomes shogun, the latter's actions once again have very little bearing on anything. Whether Orochi was the shogun or not, Kaido would have still enslaved Wano's population and created the weapons factories. Kaido himself proves this after he has seemingly killed Orochi and only plans on increasing the production of weapons in Wano. While still in Flashback, when Kaido has his fight with Oden, it is also once again Higurashi instead of Orochi who plays the plot-relevant role by allowing Kaido to land a sneak attack on Oden. All this is to say, when it comes to Kaido occupying Wano, the plot-relevant Kurosumi character is not Orochi but actually Higurashi. She is the one who initially tricked the people of Wano by impersonating Sukiyaki with the Mane Mane no Mi. This is something Orochi could have never done as he did not have that devil fruit. Higurashi is also the character who made Kaido the offer to come to Wano, and she is the one who secured his victory by impersonating Momo. After Oden's death, Orochi still doesn't do much until the actual Wano arc. He ends up recruiting Denjiro under the guise of Kyushiro to oversee the Wano Yakuza. He also gives the residents of Ebisu town leftover smile fruits, causing them to not be able to stop laughing and smiling. Orochi also recruits Killer and ends up giving him one of the faulty smile fruits. All of these plot points could very seamlessly have been accomplished by Kaido and his crew. As Kaido is always looking for strong soldiers, he naturally would have recruited both Kyushiro and Killer even without Orochi's presence. The Beast Pirates are also very sadistic, so feeding innocent civilians with smile fruit just for fun would not exactly be out of character for them. Getting away from flashbacks, Orochi becomes somewhat more relevant in the present story. Orochi's rampage in the palace leads to Hiyori having to fake her death, which leads to a series of events involving Zoro, Killer and other characters. Orochi also ends up killing Yasue, earning him the ire of Zoro. Then during the Onigashima raid, Orochi is the character who starts the fire that almost engulfs the castle. Hiyori faking her death is certainly important, as it leads to things such as Zoro getting Enma and Killer reuniting with Kid. Orochi's role could have however once again been fulfilled by one of Kaido's minions. For example, Queen could have been the character enjoying an evening with Hiyori in place of Orochi. For reference, we already know that Queen liked spending time with the Oiran and that he fancied Komurasaki. Genuinely though, any character on Kaido's side could have fulfilled Orochi's role here. All that is required is for Toko to laugh at them, causing Hiyori to intervene and for Denjiro to cut her down. With Yasue's death, Orochi's part was once again not necessary for the story to work. Yasue was going to be executed regardless of Orochi doing it personally or not. The point about Zoro wanting to avenge Yasue also never amounted to anything, as Denjiro ended up being the one who killed Orochi, and Zoro never even interacted with him during Wano Act 3. Even though Yasue could be executed by just a nameless soldier working for Kaido, a more interesting idea is that King could have been the one who killed him. While the Big Mom pirates thought that King was guarding the waterfall entrance to the country, he was apparently just staying in Onigashima at this time. King killing Yasu could have given Zoro a more personal angle in his fight against him on Onigashima, rather than what we got in the actual manga, where Zoro simply hated King because he's black. Before we continue the video, I would genuinely appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel. I'm hopefully going to be putting out more content this year starting with this video, though for full disclosure, I said the same thing at the beginning of the year and only ended up publishing 3 videos. Sorry about that. Getting back to Orochi, his final noteworthy action in the story is starting the fire on Onigashima. This was arguably something that positively impacted the story. The fire provided extra tension to the arc's climax, and also finally gave Raizo the chance to pay back his debt to the Minks by saving everyone with Zou's waters. The contention here, however, is that once again, Orochi personally was not at all necessary to start the fire. The raid on Onigashima was full of characters who used fire as a weapon, and a large-scale fire could have naturally occurred due to all of the fighting. We even saw the casual catching fire from, for example, just the collateral damage of Robin's fight with Black Maria. If the story actually required an arsonist, someone like Kanjuro could have started it by simply wanting to make sure that all of the Kosugi perished. This is the first time in the video where I'm actually bringing up Kanjuro. Unlike Orochi, he is actually an incredibly important character to the Wano arc and the One Piece story as a whole. He is so important that it could be said that Orochi's most relevant part in the story is to serve as the middleman between Kaido and Kanjuro. It is because of Kanjuro that Kaido finds out about the samurai traveling 20 years into the future. He also hands out the information that Raizo is on Zou, causing the events of the entire Zou arc. In the Wano arc, Kanjuro at first still maintains his role as a spy, leaking Kinemon's plan to the enemy, which among other things led to Yasue's death. Then during Act 3, Kanjuro ends up capturing Momonosuke, killing Ashura Doji, beating Kiku and almost igniting the Onigashima explosives. All this to say is that Kanjuro is essentially an irreplaceable character for the One Piece story. While one might think that Orochi has to also be in the story for Kanjuro's role to work, this is not actually the case. Orochi simply tells Kaido the information he gets from Kanjuro while never himself doing any of the legwork. Orochi's role as the middleman between Kaido and Kanjuro is not something that was ever necessary. Kanjuro's motivation in life is the destruction of Wano and the Kosugi, just like Orochi's. This comes from Kanjuro's childhood. where he was persecuted by the people of Wano just like all of the Kurosumi were. As Kaido is the person who both wants to kill all the Kozuki and reduce Wano to a country of slaves, Kanjuro has every reason to be loyal to him even without Orochi's involvement. Now that all of Orochi's scenes have been covered, the video will give a short summary of what the story would look like if his character was cut. The Kurosumi persecution would still happen, leading to Kanjuro and Higurashi hating the people of Wano. Higurashi would then enact the same scheme where she would impersonate Sukiyaki, then invite Kaido to occupy Wano. Kanjuro would still infiltrate the Nine Red Scabbards, but this time leak all of his information to Kaido directly. When Kaido would have his fight with Oden, Higurashi would still jinx the fight in Kaido's favor by impersonating Momonosuke. In the time between the Oden flashback and the Wano arc, Kaido would be the one who would instead of Orochi recruit Kyoshiro, on top of feeding Killer and the Episu-down residents failed smile fruits. Then in the actual Wano arc, Orochi's rampage in the palace and him killing Yasu would simply be done by the Beast Pirates. Finally, the Onigashima fire would simply happen naturally due to the collateral damage from the fighting. Hypothetically, not a lot in the story would have to be changed if Orochi's character was simply cut. Wano would still be essentially the same story, only it would be a lot tighter with all of Orochi's scenes being removed. Kaido would also have that much more presence as a villain, as he would no longer have to share the spotlight with Orochi. Furthermore, the few necessary changes Orochi's removal would create could arguably make for a better story. For example, there would be a lot more weight in Killer fighting Kaido on the rooftop if it had actually been him who'd fed Killer the smile fruit. This also applies to Zoro, if it had been King instead of Orochi who'd killed Yasu, as brought up earlier in the video. Before moving on to the final part of the video, I will address a couple caveats to the idea of cutting Orochi from the story. The first one is actually connected to the character of Doflamingo and Dressrosa. For an unknown reason, Orochi in the manga did not tell Kaido that Kanjuro was the spy who was giving them all of the information about the Kozuki. Because of this, when Kinemon, Kanjuro and Momonosuke came to Dressrosa, Kanjuro was apprehended by Doflamingo's goons. If Kaido was getting his information from Kanjuro directly, Kaido would have surely told Doflamingo that he was working for him and Kanjuro would have never been attacked on Dressrosa. I don't, however, consider this to be a big enough reason for Orochi needing to be kept in the story. This is because this issue can be easily fixed by Sugar being the character who targeted Kanjuro. Sugar could have simply turned Kanjuro into a toy before Doflamingo ever heard that he was on the island, after which Dofi would have simply forgotten about him like everyone else. The only thing that would really change in the story is that Kinemon would only remember Kanjuro and that he was on Dressrosa after Usopp made Sugar dispel her ability. Another caveat I want to address is the notion that CP0 wouldn't have come to Wano if not for Orochi. This is because Orochi is seemingly the person in Wano that the government is buying weapons from, and the one who invited CP0 agents to attend the Fire Festival. I believe this to be a good caveat. However, I will also admit that I'm confused about whether or not Kaido was aware that his weapons were being sold to the government. This is because King, Queen and Jack talk about the Beast Pirates having a new trading partner after Doflamingo's fall, who one would assume is the government. Yet, members of the Beast Pirates like Drake and Abu are genuinely surprised when they say CP0 in Wano. Regardless of whether Kaido would have invited CP0 to Onigashima or not, I believe this to be another plot point that could have been addressed without Orochi. Even if Kaido was against dealing with CP0, the agents could have simply infiltrated the Fire Festival by themselves. Even though they didn't know that a war would break out, they had more than enough reason to be there to gather intel on Kaido and Big Mom's new alliance. There is one last thing I want to discuss with this video, which is an actual positive aspect to Orochi's character. This video mainly argues that Orochi's character has very little impact on the One Piece plot. While this may be true, Orochi does arguably still have value in fleshing out Kaido's character. Kaido's dynamic with Orochi actually helps demonstrate Kaido's humility and surprising lack of ego. On paper, Orochi might well come off as someone Kaido wouldn't like, as he's a weak coward who never truly earned the position he's in. This is in stark contrast to Kaido, who very much believes in a might makes right worldview where the strong should get to decide how things are run. Kaido is however completely nonchalant with Orochi. He doesn't at all mind giving Orochi equal share of the spotlight, despite knowing that he's the one who truly holds all the power. Kaido allows Orochi to rule Wano as he pleases and pretty much treats him as an equal. In theory, Kaido doesn't need to do any of this. As brought up before, even after Kaido chopped off Orochi's head, all of his minions immediately started following Kaido, proving that he was never a necessary part of Kaido's plans. The only real reason why Kaido didn't kill Orochi before is seemingly that he just couldn't be bothered. While keeping Orochi around didn't really benefit Kaido in any way, there was also no drawback to it either. This speaks a lot about Kaido's character, where he for over 20 years was willing to let a sniveling weakling like Orochi stand shoulder to shoulder to him, when he at any moment could have chopped his head off. This actually makes Kaido very much stand out among villains in One Piece. Most of them are very egotistical and believe themselves to be superior to everyone else. For example, Don Krieg treats both his enemies and his crew as being beneath him, deluding himself into thinking that he's the strongest in the world. Big Mom sees her own children as mere underlings, and is even insulted when they try to help her out. Saturn goes even further, where he sees regular humans as nothing more than ants. Kaido's lack of ego is actually something very unique, especially since Kaido is to date arguably the most successful and powerful villain Luffy's ever encountered. And while his humility is still showcased, for example in how fairly Kaido treats his crew or how he's willing to let even former enemies become his followers, it would not be the same without his dynamic with Orochi. The video earlier made a point that Kaido's role as a villain would be improved if Orochi was cut by Kaido getting more focus. While this might still be true, the way Orochi helps flesh out Kaido's character is not entirely without merit, and is perhaps the only truly worthwhile thing his character brought to the story. Overall though, I believe the points that were made earlier in the story still stand. Despite how much time and focus the manga gives to Orochi in the story, he's in the end a very meaningless character who would have been better off not being written. Now that the video is over, I wouldn't mind hearing if somebody has a different take on Orochi, or if they thought that I misrepresented his character in the comments. Also, if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on Kaido's character, click on this video that discusses his and Big Mom's possible return to the story. Thanks for watching the video to the end.